given presentations about her book, Freedom and Dialogue in a Polarized World. I'm just very, very pleased that she is here with us today. So thank you, Sharon. And I'm going to pick up here.
Well, this is a great opportunity for me because, like many people, I was frustrated about the state of our civic life, I guess you would have to say. The ability of democracy to sustain itself. I really think on the big questions, I have to say. And I had the opportunity for many years to teach with political theorists. I'm in literature myself. And I got to asking a lot of the big questions. And it really boils down to, are people capable of making the decisions that need to be made to sustain democracy? It's really that simple. And so I set about working on this book, and 5 or 6 years later finished it, and 5 or 6 years after that got it published. Honestly, my ideas about polarization have been developing for a long time, and the comical but I must say sad thing about it all is that now that the book is published and the world is continuing to spin the way it is, my book becomes more relevant every day, and that's why people are asking me to talk, but I'm sort of sad about that, but in some ways happy because I want people to read the book. The most recent presentation I gave, I'll give you this when you go ahead to a slide. I was talking for the Register Guard at a gathering. They had 150 people to talk about polarization. And I have been writing in the newspaper about the seductions of polarization, how we like to think we personally are not the polarized type. But, there's a lot of things that it does for us. It makes us feel better about ourselves because other people agree with us. We get a sense of community with people we've never even met because they're online. We get a sense of superiority about all those stupid people over there who disagree with us. We relish the prospect of winning at the next election because maybe we lost at the last one. And honestly, it's pretty easy to get into this polarized thinking because you don't really have to think very hard. You just go, boom, we're there. Path of least resistance, and it gives us, I think, a false idea of freedom because we think, I can do something about this, I can speak, I can act out, when actually what you're doing is just making more noise in the echo chamber. So, we've got those seductions, so we all get drawn toward it, and yet, we also know what the downside is. People don't listen to each other. There's a total lack of communication. We feel deeply frustrated. The political world moves more and more toward paralysis. They can't get a darn thing done. And we as citizens feel more and more isolated. Even though we got our little echo chambers, we feel kind of powerless to actually do anything to make a difference that's important. So some people resort to violence, don't need to dwell on that. And there's a fundamental, I think, widespread sense of despair that comes across the populace, and it's sort of a civic problem. So I got to thinking, well, lots of people have explanations for what's at the root of all of this, and I take a kind of a slightly different approach. Because I'm looking at deeply systematic things about our thinking. And for me, it revolves on our ideas about freedom. And my book's called Freedom and Dialogue in a Polarized World. And I really am talking about freedom in the book a lot as, I guess I would say, a partial cause of polarization and hopefully a solution to polarization. But most of us think about freedom in two basic ways, which you have a handout in front of you. You don't have to read it, but you can take it home with you and look at some of this stuff later. We all have this idea, leave me alone to do as I please as long as I don't hurt anybody else. Don't mess with me. I want to be free to do as I please. This is a very fundamental idea of freedom. We call it autonomy, and John Stuart Mill wrote a whole book about it, and John Locke wrote about it. Lots of important political philosophers wrote about it, and we all take it seriously. I myself like this sense of freedom. I want to do as I please as long as I don't hurt anybody. But there's a lot of problems with it. With this idea of freedom, we protect it by having rights. We pass legislation, we go to court, we elect candidates on the basis of the fact that they will protect our right to be free in this way. And you see this language in a lot of the really big polarized debates. Like, think about abortion. There's the right to life versus the right to choose. They're both trying to protect a right. Well, the way you protect those rights is by passing laws. The way you protect those laws is passing those laws is to have campaigns. The way you campaign is to collect a lot of money and make a lot of flamboyant statements, get people really riled up so they'll vote the way you want them to vote, and you'll have the power to enact the protection of the right that you think is important. So autonomy, which involves protecting your right to do as you please, leads to a kind of fixation with power and results, which often leads to this polarized encampment, because that's the way you win elections, okay? So I feel like it's an important freedom. I cherish it myself, but it has a downside, which is very, very dangerous. There's a second form of freedom, which is also on your handout, which I call enlightenment. It's not the Enlightenment. Don't confuse it with that historical thing. It has nothing to do with reason, necessarily. The quote I have for you there on the handout is from Plato's Republic. And it's all about when you can leave the cave of illusion where we normally dwell and confront the light of truth, the good, then you can become an enlightened person, and then it's up to the philosopher king to go back into that cave and try to convert others. Well, this is a very, the phrase that you will hear, maybe you've even used it, the truth will set you free. We know that phrase. And that truth could be religious, it could be political, it could be philosophical, as it was in Plato's situation. But it always involves a capital T. You know what the truth is. You know what the truth is. And all you need is for all those unenlightened idiots out there to just agree with you, right? Well, you can see how this might easily become a problem because different people have different ideas of what the truth is. I loved those statements you all made before I started, the golden rule from 10 different religions. Anyway, enlightenment. It's a problem with polarization too, because you just think of those hordes of people who disagree with you about gun control or disagree with you about immigration or whatever it is, the death penalty. You just dismiss them as fools. That's what, you're enlightened, and if you can't just get them to sit down and listen to you and then say, oh yeah, you're right, which isn't going to happen very often, you just dismiss them. So the idea of freedom as knowing the truth and the idea of freedom as protecting your autonomy, your right to do as you please, these both feed into polarization. That was my starting point. And so I came up with another idea of freedom, and I have to say, nobody else has actually put it in these terms, which is why I wrote a book and give presentations and all that stuff. But this idea of freedom is in our daily lives. It's around us all the time. I did not invent it. I just put words to it. And I stole those words largely from someone who was writing about language, not about freedom at all. If he had thought of it, he would have said it about freedom, but he didn't. And so we'll get into, you can go to the next slide. What I'm saying is, what my whole book is trying to promote is something I call dialogic freedom. And I'll give it to you in a nutshell to begin with, and then I'll explain its elements, and then I'll be done. It's the whole idea is you think about yourself as, I become more free. I get more free. The better able I am to see from the perspectives of other people and to take in action in a world that they share with me. So it's very much an idea of freedom that's dependent on the fact that we live among others. It's not leave me alone to do as I please or I see the truth. It's something different. And it involves this freedom to navigate the perspectives of others. Have you ever had like a plumber at your house and he's trying to explain what it is that he wants you to do that he just did to fix your problem, and suddenly you can't understand him because he's got an expertise you don't share. Or, heaven forbid, you go to the doctor's office and you have a complaint. They start to explain what it is, what they're going to do about it, what you're going to do about it, and you say, what? To the extent that we can think like a doctor, we can think like a plumber, we could think like an officer of the law, like an army person, like a musician, like a dancer, like all those other people around us, to the extent that we can navigate the perspectives from which they see the world, see as they do, without, this is an important part of it too, without losing ourselves in them. We're not turning ourselves over to other people's view of the world, but we want to see from those views and still retain our senses of ourselves. To the extent that we can do that, we can be more free. That's the idea here. I stole the idea of the dialogic, it's a dialogue between us and others, from this guy, Mikhail Bakhtin, who lived during the Stalin era. And he was a brilliant intellectual, but he was imprisoned and largely ignored in his lifetime, and became so famous afterwards when people started translating his works into English. And to this day, more of his works are constantly being translated into English. There's conferences all over the world that honor him. And so I just want to say, he had one idea. Go to the next slide, that I stole. And he said, word is a two-sided act. That is to say, when we speak to each other, it's a two-sided thing. Before he said that, what the intellectuals were always saying was, I get an idea in my head, I put it into words, I lob that idea to your head, you decode it, you put it in your head, and that's called communication. Okay? That's really what it was all about. And he said, no. The meaning gets created right between us. She's looking very intently at me like, okay, I'm going to listen. And so that encourages me, and she just smiled and laughed too. That encourages me to continue. If somebody's over there checking their cell phone or looking at their watch or, heaven forbid, putting on the coat and leaving, then I say, wrap it up, not interested. What response you give constantly every day in your life to all the people around you is either encouragement or neutrality or negativity, whatever it is, detachment, boredom, that determines what they say. Yeah, and whether they stay around to say it. So word is a two-sided act. It is determined equally by whose word it is and for whom it is meant. We're always thinking about who's the listener. Who's the listener? The product of the reciprocal relationship between speaker and listener, addresser and addressee. That's the way he put it in a book he wrote. So turn to the next slide. I want to illustrate this with one of my favorite moments from literature. Oh my God. How many of you have read the Iliad? In this group, yes, quite a few. Okay, I don't want to wreck it for anybody who hasn't read it. But, you know, Troy burns. It's kind of a sad tale of war. And at the middle of it is this character, Achilles. The opening line says about the anger of Achilles. He is a dangerous dude. And at the climax, this is the part that you're seeing in this work of art here. At the climax of the Iliad, the old Trojan king, who is very feeble and couldn't fight any warrior anywhere, manages for various ways to get all the way to the tent of the leader of the enemy army, which is indeed Achilles' tent, because Achilles killed Priam's son Hector a couple of days before, and has spent all of his time going around the gates of Troy, flaunting the corpse by dragging it behind his horse and bumping the head on the bricks in the field or the dirt, and, you know, defiling the corpse. And Priam wants to bury his son. He wants to bury him. That's what the end of the Iliad is all about. And so he has to get there to Achilles to beg him to release the corpse. Well, Achilles is an angry guy. He could snap Priam's neck like a twig if he pleased, Or he could just lose control of himself and kill him for whatever reason. I mean, he's an angry man. And so here's Priam. He gets on his knees in front of Achilles, and he says, I put my lips to the hands of the man who killed my son. It's such a great line. It's so moving. And honestly, the kneeling supplicant was a very common thing for the ancient Greeks and for the Romans, and we still see it in movies and stuff, that someone who's begging for something going on there. But Homer was the only one, and this story was the only place where the kissing of the hand is involved with the kneeling. And it's an amazing moment. So not only does he beg, but he's talking with Achilles, and you can go back and read this part of the Iliad, you should, or read it in my book. But what Priam does is he gets Achilles to think about his own father at home, worrying about his son, not knowing whether his son is alive or dead. And then he gets him thinking about his father and the people around him who are trying to take over the lands because only an old man is in charge. He gets to thinking about how sad that father would be if his own son died. And he gets empathy going with Achilles. Now, and at every moment, he's afraid to go too far to get Achilles angry, to remind him that Hector, because Hector killed Achilles' best friend, and that's why Achilles killed Hector. So he has to play this very carefully, otherwise Achilles will get angry and kill him. So anticipating how his listener thinks, anticipating how empathy can be created, it's a masterful analysis of that, the two-sided nature of making a decision, because indeed Achilles does decide to release the corpse. Go to the next one. I better not take that long on each one of these, but I love this literature, so you know. I always tell people, come to my presentation. I have naked ladies. This is naked lady number 1. I don't know, how many of you read The Inferno of Dante? Another great work. Okay, fewer, but congratulations to you, The Inferno. It's a great, I mean, especially for a group of Christian women, I say take it on, do it. It's really a wonderful work of literature. And so I think in your handout, we have a little quote. Let's see if I can find it. I'm the one who made this handout. Dante, this is about in the middle of the page, the first page. Dante the Pilgrim calls to Paolo and Francesca, who are fused together because they're in the 5th circle of hell devoted to lust. I'm not going to explain what lust means. He says to them, "O wearied souls, come speak with us." Francesca responds because she's receptive to Dante's compassion because he calls them, "O wearied souls." He's showing some empathy toward them. She responds, she said, "For pitying us in this our evil end." She hears the pity in his voice. And so there's a two-sidedness before she agrees to talk. He's going through hell interviewing people. That's what the Inferno is all about. But they don't all have to talk. They can't all talk, and they don't all choose to talk. So she and Paolo kind of, as they get blown by the winds of lust, backed by Virgil and Dante. Virgil is Dante's guide. You can see him. Let's show you in the back. See, there's Dante. He's the guy in red. And there's Virgil. He's his guide because he wrote the Aeneid, and Dante is trying to write the first epic in Italian, in a modern language. And so Virgil is his guide. There's kind of allegorical truth that, but he's also his moral guide. It's an allegory with many levels. Anyway, there they are, and they decide to go speak with them, and it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen at all if they didn't sense his empathy. So there's this two-sidedness to the decision they make to come and talk to him. Go to the next. So two-sided is shorthand for many-sided, and this is a leap I want you to try to make here with me. We all answer not just to the person we're talking with and the person we're looking at and the one person who might be right here in front of us. We are answering to the values that we hold. We answer to our friends. We answer to our family. We answer to the colleagues we work with. our religious traditions, our religious convictions, they are all important kind of advisors in our life, and we take them into consideration when we go to make an important decision. It could be a political party that we feel very attached to, and its values are really important to us. Or it could be other personal values, just values that we have come up with over time. Or it could be something as general as reason. If it's not reasonable, I don't want to do it. Convince me that it's reasonable. Or maybe we're law-abiding and we wouldn't want to do something to break the law. The law is something we answer to, or the concept of justice, or just it doesn't feel right, or it does feel right. So we have a lot of things we answer to, and usually we don't even think about it. We don't acknowledge them. And part of what I want to say about polarization is if we look within ourselves and try to figure out the complexity of things that are entering into a particular position we take on a particular subject, we might be able to find things about it that we answer to that actually are in common with people who disagree with us. They answer to some of the same things, but they come to different conclusions. This could be really, really important. So go to the next slide. So I want to talk about dialogic freedom, and there's three aspects to it that are that I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to illustrate them as best as I can. You see these two ice skaters up there. He's twirling her around. If he were to let go, heaven forbid, she goes crashing into the mats. I hope there's mats at the edge of the rink, because he's exerting a force inward. And the actual motion is exerting a force outward. And we call the physicists tell me there's no such thing as centrifugal and centripetal forces, but I don't care. So basically, we've got competing forces for unity and chaos. And that we live in a world where that's constantly the case. Okay, go to the next slide. So one of the things we do is we have ideas that unify our thinking. It could be different kinds of political narratives or religious concept or whatever it is. But I can illustrate on a very simple level with the idea of a tree. Everybody knows what a tree is. We could argue all night if we wanted to, but everybody knows what a tree is. And, but there's the idea of a tree versus a particular physical tree. Go to the next slide. This tree was in University Park, and during the ice storm, a giant tree, gorgeous tree, and it just broke. And they've since taken it down and taken out the root bulb and planted a small little tree, little baby tree. And every tree is different from every other tree. And sometimes you know a tree so well that you feel like it's a member of the family. Go on. So we've got these unifying forces in our lives. The ideas and values that we hold dear, the various political narratives or patterns we see somewhere. But there's fragmenting forces at the same time. And this is important because polarization depends on constantly having that unifying force at the front to simplify everything and say, if you're with me, you're with me. If you're against me, there's an excess of unifying forces in the polarized mind. So, but if we can be aware of the fragmenting forces that are quite legitimate in our own thinking, this, I think, is a positive thing. It helps us become more free. So there might be competing ideas that even we entertain to some of our main ideas that we feel committed to. There certainly are all of those little events that happen every day. Every moment of every day is different from the moment before and not the same as any moment that will happen in any other day. So these events are unrepeatable. I mean, we might be happy, but we're not happy in the same way. We might go out to take a run, but it won't be exactly the same run we had before. Moment by moment, our lives are completely unique. And that's kind of a force for chaos. It's fun, but you can't put it in a neat little box. So we live in a world where we're constantly balancing the need for unity because we have to say, well, I'm going to be there at 10. I better shorten my run. I got up late this morning. You make a decision, and that you unify all of the forces in your mind that could be a recipe for chaos so that you can get where you need to go on time, or make a decision, I'm going to vote for X, not Y. But there's other competing ideas, and the various forces for chaos in life are going to continue swirling about us, and we have to balance that. We have to balance those things all the time. And to pretend that life isn't complex is a recipe for polarization. So the first aspect, just to summarize before we move on, is recognizing that we live in a world where we're balancing forces between unity and chaos. That is the first aspect of understanding dialogic freedom. This is the second aspect. We want to be able to navigate the perspectives of others. This is a really important thing to be able to do, is to be able to see from other people's perspectives. And I get this image up here of the layers of the ocean because it's like, you know, when we swim, if we're not wearing any gear, we got to stay close enough to the surface to be able to come up and breathe. If we've got some tanks, we can go a little deeper, but we can't go deeper than the pressure will allow us to go before we get in trouble. What if we could swim through all of the layers of the ocean, not that I would necessarily want to do it, it'd get very cold, all the way down to the deepest crevices? I'm thinking of that metaphorically. If we as individual human beings could always understand everyone we're talking with, we could understand how they think, we could understand where they were coming from, we could understand how they would come to the conclusions they would come to. Wouldn't that be interesting? It might be infuriating, but it would certainly be fascinating. And so here's another image of that. You're swimming along and there's all these other fish and you're able to swim anywhere. So we've got the fact that dialogic freedom is a two-sided act. So it's never something you do in isolation. There's these forces for unity and chaos that you're trying to balance. And there's the importance of navigating the perspectives of others. And if you can keep all these things in mind, I argue we can become more free by being able to see better from the perspectives of others. And you would think, oh good, she's done. We can get out of here and they can get the wedding. Well, guess what? As I thought more about this, I realized just as there's downsides to autonomy and enlightenment, guess what? There's downsides to dialogic freedom, and I think they're important to think about. They're fascinating to think about too. First we're going to have a definition here. Dialogic freedom, a two-sided act chosen within a field of unifying and fragmenting forces among layers of knowing, that's the perspectives, that are never final. Never final. You could never know enough about trying to see from the perspective of another human being. So does that almost make sense? Isn't that amazing? It's gobbledygook. Go to the next. So here we go. Let's get into these problems. We were back there with Paolo and Francesca. They were in hell for a reason. But Dante, he is so persuaded by the charismatic Francesca, who says, oh, we've suffered so much. His brother killed us right when we were in the middle of having sex, and you know, we love each other. And he faints in empathy for them. Cadi, he says, cadi come corpo morto cade. Italian's so much better than English sometimes. I fell like a dying body falls. He felt so empathetic toward them in their plight. And so here's poor Virgil thinking, all right, I knew he brought me for a reason. Virgil is holding the collapsed Dante in his arms, and Paolo and Francesca are looking on saying, well, yeah, he definitely sympathized with us. That's how Canto 5 ends. It's just, he collapses. Canto 6, I think I've got this on the handout here. Let's see. Problems. Oh yeah, okay. Now, I will say that we'll go back to my friend Mikhail Bakhtin first, because he talks about empathy in a lot of his writings. He says, we should almost merge or become one with a suffering friend in sympathetic understanding. This is all very good. Listen to your friend's story and identify, and empathy is good. But, he says, avoid pure empathizing, which is pathological, an infection with another's suffering. it's essential that we be able to return unto ourselves, into ourselves. Because guess what? If you just duplicate the other person's suffering, you're suffering too, and you haven't been able to help. You're just both messed up, suffering people. And so he says, watch out. You gotta, be able to return to yourself. So here's Dante the Pilgrim who's swooning. But if you read the Inferno, you'll discover that there's two Dantes. There's Dante the Pilgrim, who's going through hell with Virgil as his guide. And there's Dante the poet, who's writing the story. And guess what? He put Paolo and Francesca in hell. So there's this conflict between what the poet decides to do with those two lovers and what the pilgrim feels in response to them. And so when he starts Canto 6, the next canto, it says, al tornar della mente che si chiuse, and which means at the returning of my mind, which had closed. Think about that language. My mind had closed. So you're feeling very empathetic, but you're only reduplicating their suffering. It can turn to a shutdown of your mind because your critical facilities, which would be saying, how can I help? How can I help? What can I do? What do they really need? Should I do more active listening? I mean, whatever. Your mind has shut down. So you've got to watch out for that. And in fact, Dante does live to tell the tale, but it's a danger. It's a danger. Sympathy that turns into total identification and obliterates your own personality. That's not a good thing. It's dangerous. So go on. Second illustrator of the problem, perhaps more relevant to a group of Christian women united. I guess you probably all know the sad story of Adam and Eve. I won't be wrecking this for anyone. Milton wrote a fabulous epic called Paradise Lost. Has anybody here read Milton's Paradise Lost? All right. Almost nobody ever raises their hand when I ask that question. It's a great, great work, one of the greatest works of literature in English. And at the high point of it, which you might say is a low point, certainly for Adam and Eve, this is a great work of art, I think. It shows Satan whispering in the ear of Eve. This is the second naked lady, by the way. And he's kind of cute, except for the fact that his whole body is a snake. And so he says to Eve, and this is apropos of the problem of being able to see from the perspective of somebody else. I just talked about the problem of empathy. This is a slightly different problem that those who are really masters of dialogic freedom might have. And I say, one of the things I write about in my book is how Satan probably understands dialogic freedom better than any being that has ever been created, except perhaps God. So Satan says to Eve, look on me who have touched and tasted, yet both live and life more perfect have attained than fate meant me by venturing higher than my lot. Look at the physical evidence. And really, indeed, he can talk. How do you learn to talk? What's the deal? And he's being so nice to me. Here, try this apple. Go to the next slide and you'll see this in context. Now, this is my only literature lesson in the whole presentation, but I just could not resist. This is one of the great speeches in all of literature. Eve says to Satan, and I've got my little pointer here, of this tree we may not taste nor touch. God so commanded, and left that command sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live law to ourselves. Our reason is our law. Okay, so she said, our reason is our law. I put that in red. It's kind of hard to see, but really important. Okay, so say you're a nefarious character, someone up to no good, and somebody says to you, who you want to get to do what you want them to do, I'll do whatever's reasonable. What's that an open invitation for? Being exceedingly reasonable in a kind of manipulative sort of way. Watch this. He starts with the look on me, and notice the word fate. And life more perfect have attained than fate meant me. Well, guess what? In the ancient world, there was a very powerful force called fate. Even the gods couldn't resist it. He has now demoted the Christian God to the concept of fate. And so God's not even in the picture. By venturing higher than my lot, or will God incense his ire? Okay, ire, anger. Didn't we just talk about the anger of Achilles? Isn't anger one of the 7 deadly sins? Isn't anger something that can take over your whole personality and reduce and end your freedom and wreck your life? So guess what? God can experience anger? I don't think so. Maybe righteous indignation, maybe justice, but God doesn't have these petty emotions that human beings have. But Satan has, when he devoted him to fate, he also devoted him to the human motion of ire. This is Satan is reasoning with Eve. Or will God incense his ire for such a petty trespass? So obvious that I'll skip over it. And not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom pain of death denounced. What everything death be? Oh wait, they're in paradise. The fall hasn't happened yet. There is no such thing as death, according to Milton and Christian scripture, before the fall of man. The blossoms are on the trees along with the fruit. The animals don't have fangs. They all dance around and prance around. They're happy with each other. Nothing dies. So he says, what everything death be, reinforcing for Eve the fact that she hasn't experienced death. She hasn't seen death. If there's a threat of death, what the heck does that mean? Deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil, of good, how just, of evil, if evil be real. Once again, there's no evil before the fall of man. So he's pointing out things that she doesn't even really know. Why not known, since easier shunned? Isn't that good advice? See, that's the problem. He can use reason, and it is a virtuosic performance of using reason to try to convince somebody to do something. The only way she could really resist him is to say, well, we were told not to, and we're not going to do it. And that just doesn't work with people with a lot of critical thinking skills. They'll use those critical thinking skills, and she has them in abundance. So we know where that goes to. But we don't have to look back to Satan to see manipulative charlatans. You've got to watch out for them, and heaven forbid, you've got to not be one of them. And so next slide. I don't suppose you recognize that face. So the problem, if you are really good at dialogic freedom, if you're really good at seeing from the perspective of others, you will be tempted to manipulate others, and don't. Can you keep going? We're not going to dwell on him. So, dialogic freedom. I become more free, the better able I am to see from the perspectives of others and take action in a world they share. That's the idea. Now, how does that translate to our world that we actually live in? Go to the next slide. I have a chapter in my book about abortion because it's an endlessly interesting subject. It never gets solved. It's very polarizing. In my family, we're very polarized about it. And it's conveniently full of symbolism that's reinforcing my points that I'm trying to make. Look at those stop signs. They both use stop signs. Isn't that funny? Stop abortion, stop the war on women. It's the right to life versus the right to choose. Both sides dismiss each other as fools. If you go to prominent websites that advocate for either side, there's very little that's to appeal to somebody who disagrees with you. There's everything to actually insult the other side and also to just reinforce whoever already agrees. Go to the next one. And so you see these like a gathering, some sort of a protest. And you see the echo chambers made visible, people who agree with each other, and they're going to just do that. And then you go to the websites, you see comments, but they're inflammatory comments that are meant to offend the people who don't agree with you. Why don't you spend your time ending rape rather than redefining it? That's a pro-choice statement. Unborn babies feel pain. That's a pro-life statement. And, not calling it a fetus, calling it a baby, or insisting not calling it a baby, but calling it a fetus. Even the language chosen is meant to offend. So I thought I'd pick another subject too, make it even more current. And my book has the Statue of Liberty on the front of it, and it's a book about freedom. So I thought I would find two really polarizing images having to do with current politics that involve the Statue of Liberty, and it wasn't even hard. On the pro-Trump side of things, you have this tsunami that's kind of cut off, but it says like 4 million or 5 million illegal aliens a year. And the poor Statue of Liberty is trying to say the usual motto in it. I have an epilogue in my book about the Statue of Liberty. You can read that whole motto. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to, watch out! And so this tsunami of illegal immigrants is about to take down the Statue of Liberty, ruin freedom for the rest of us. It's a brilliant political cartoon, actually, I think. And then, of course, here's the cover of Der Spiegel. Oh my God. I thought this was the most shocking cover of a magazine I think I've ever seen. Der Spiegel, it's like Time magazine of Germany. They had our president with a terrorist knife and holding up the head of the Statue of Liberty that he has decapitated. Enough said. So we are at the mercy of this very polarized thinking right now, and more so than ever. And I'm trying to say that if we can embrace dialogic freedom and a more nuanced sense of seeing from the perspectives of others and understanding the complexity of our own thoughts and theirs, that we will be happier and better citizens. So as I was looking around for people who had done interesting things, I came across the Public Conversations Project, which is now called Essential Partners. You can go online and go to the work that they do all over the world, bringing together people who disagree with each other to talk about polarizing issues. It was founded in 1994 by Laura Chazin, who is now deceased, in Cambridge. And they structured conversations. People would say, we want to talk about the death penalty, and they come together with their different views, and they were trying to build human relationships and understanding. They are now operating in every country on the world and every state in the union, and you can go to those websites and find out more about them. And what I found fascinating, go to the next slide, I read a lot of their materials, and I came up with two things that I thought were really, really intriguing. When they have these conversations, what they have people talk about is two questions. First, what events or personal experiences shaped your views? And I actually have simplified that to, can you talk about a personal experience that is really important in the development of your views on this topic? And you notice then all of a sudden the emphasis is not on, these are the arguments in favor of my position, you should agree with me or go home, but rather, I had this experience. And as the person talks about that experience, they get a better self-understanding. And as you listen to that experience, you get to know them, you get to empathize. We actually did this at the Register Guard gathering that at least one person here was at. It was amazing. 150 people had talking in small groups for about 15 minutes going through this experience. And so that's one thing that you could try at Thanksgiving dinner with someone. The other one is even more important, because sometimes you get in an echo chamber where you know everybody agrees with you. But what if you were to ask this question? Do you have mixed feelings or uncertainties about your own perspective? All right? This one I find fascinating because I myself am pro-choice, but I'm giving you an example of how I have mixed feelings or uncertainties, okay? And it's also an experience. Got a phone call one night, and our son was calling from Austin, Texas, and he said, Lonnie's got a bun in the oven. He's always a metaphorical boy. And I did not say to myself, oh, an egg has been fertilized and attached to the uterine wall, and about 6 months from now, I can begin to consider the fetus viable, and we can talk about becoming grandparents. No, I did a happy dance right at that moment. We're going to be grandparents, I can't wait. But if the courts in America were to decide that what I felt at that very moment was actually the capital T truth, Roe versus Wade would be overturned, and the possibility of passing anti-abortion legislation throughout the country, floodgates, you know? And so that's a contradiction in my thinking, excuse me. But I think that going back to these unifying ideas and centrifugal forces that are chaotic, we all have these pushes and pulls. in our thinking. And the better we understand them, the better able we're to talk with somebody else without it degenerating into a quarrel or just silence. So I really recommend thinking about these things. I think it's a gift that the Public Conversations Project gave to us to try to talk with each other in these ways, because honestly, I don't think we'll get anywhere trying to change anybody's mind on any particular issue. A lot of my friends say to me, yeah, you know, I had a conversation with so-and-so, and I do think I planted a seed. You know, that presumes that you are the one who knows everything, and they are the one who knows nothing. And that negates my whole idea about trying to see from the perspectives of others, because honest to God, there are things about those perspectives that I and you and we all can really learn from and be enlarged by. And you have to really believe that, rather than, oh, I'm going to be patient, I'm going to be a good listener, and I know that person is totally wrong. So that's what it's all about for me, trying to convince people to experiment with dialogic freedom. And I read a whole book about it, and I brought a few copies, and I'm not exactly selling them because I had to buy these copies at my author discount, and I'm passing them on at that same discount. It's the paperback version now, and it's $20. So I brought a few copies in case anybody wants it. And I wrote the book to be understandable by any intelligent person. It's not an academic book. I fought with the publishers to get all of the really academic stuff into footnotes and appendices. So it's, you know, it's meant to be read. I'm more and more people are reading it, and I'm really happy about that. Let's see, I think that might be the end of my slides. Go forward. Oh, okay. There are things we can do to cultivate dialogic freedom. We can look within ourselves to identify the values we answer to individually and try to understand those better. Lots of times we don't really examine those at all. And look for potential conflicts between them so that you can see that our own thinking is nuanced on a particular subject. And try and navigate the perspectives of others. Who do they answer to? Is there possible common ground? I really appreciate this opportunity to be here, and I want to, at this point, give you an opportunity to make statements, ask questions, talk about anything at all having to do with freedom that you think is of interest. So, thanks for being here.